Hey, what's up? I'm Sean, host of this very show, The Gray Area. For the show this week, I'm talking to Marc Dunkelman. He recently wrote a book called Why Nothing Works. And if you are the type of person who wonders why nothing seems to work anymore, why the government, our government, can't seem to do anything well or reliably or at scale, this is the book for you. Marc explains sort of how we got here, where things went sideways, and how the hell we can get this thing back on the tracks. It's a great book. He's a great guest. I learned a lot, and you will too. Check it out, and I'll see you soon. Marc Dunkelman, welcome to the show.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks.
Let's talk about your book, the title of which is Why Nothing Works. Are you making the case here that America, our beloved country, is broken? That's quite the accusation, sir.
Well, yeah, I think that broadly I'm trying to connect with people who feel frustrated that a country that used to be able to do a lot of big things now seems incapable of doing even the mundane. And that feels like it's indicative of some larger wrongness with what's happening in America today.
So any democracy has to do a couple of things at the same time, right? Citizens have to have a say in the decisions that impact their lives, and government has to be empowered to do big, consequential things. And you argue this tension is baked uneasily into progressive thought, and really it goes all the way back to the founding of the country. So just say a bit about that and why Hamilton and Jefferson are the two faces of this tension.
Yeah, so right from the beginning of the nation's story, America is betwixt and between two impulses. And one of those impulses, which you see in the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, is one that is really frightened of centralized power. And Jefferson writes that document, and it's born from an impulse to say there is some big bureaucracy that is far away that is coercing us to do things that we don't want to do, and that the thing that would save us would be freedom from that. So that's what the Declaration of Independence is. And when the founders created independence for us, they created a system under the Articles of Confederation, and the Articles were a system that created real chaos, right? That we had independent states. In order to have a national government, we didn't have an executive branch. All the states basically had veto power over anything. It was like a government run entirely by filibuster, but filibuster by any given state. A single senator could filibuster anything. And within a decade, people realized that this sort of antithesis of old British colonial rule, which was too centralized, was the opposite, which was rule under the Articles was too chaotic. Power was too dispersed and too spread for government to actually run effectively. There was too much chaos. And so the founders tried to find a medium, which was the Constitution, which was our second structure of government, which was sort of an in-between, meaning that Hamilton was sort of played a larger role in the construction of the Constitution and probably would have taken it further had it not been for some moderated influences. But his idea is we need to bring back power to a centralized authority that will be able to make choices, that in a pluralistic society with different voices wanting different things and people having different values and ideas, what you need is to empower some centralized decision maker to make good decisions in the public interest.
This tension, between liberty and authority, which is really what we're talking about, that's always been a challenge for democracies everywhere. There's nothing new there. Is there something unique about America's cultural aversion to power, especially state power?
In every group of humans, you have to figure out some sort of a system for dealing with disagreement. And I don't think that's a uniquely American problem. I do think that America has a system that is uniquely designed to be able to vacillate between maybe a little bit too much authoritarianism, as we had probably in the middle of the 20th century, and a little bit too much chaos, as we have today, and we've had in other periods in American history. And we've come to sort of, in the sense that things are go from one extreme to the other. I think we're at one particular extreme now, and we're probably headed back.
So the distrust is always there in the background, and then the pendulum of distrust has swung a little too aggressively, and now we are where we are, right? But all this distrust of power, it didn't emerge out of a vacuum, right? I mean, there's the institutional racism and Vietnam and Watergate and the glut of pollution and all the corruption and captured regulators over the years. I mean, we just don't have a lot of faith in our institutions. And if we're honest, it's because they haven't been all that trustworthy in many cases, which is just a long way of asking if the current predicament is less about distrust and more about the public justifiably losing confidence in government.
You're absolutely right. We go through these periods in history where we have real frustration that nothing is getting done. At the turn of the 20th century, there's sort of a notion that power is dispersed among political machines, and that if you want to get something done, it's easier to get something done at the parochial level by knowing your local ward politician who can maybe get your ne'er-do-well brother-in-law a job in the sanitation department than it is to build a good sanitation system. Politics is sort of a game of localism and parochialism, so you can't do big things. So those are moments where we are looking for a move towards a more Hamiltonian approach. Then there are the opposite moments, right? There are moments where we see strong centralized institutions that look oppressive. That's what was happening right around the Revolution, where we saw taxation without representation. So we wanted to push, in a Jeffersonian sense, power back down to localities. That's exactly what we saw in the 50s and 60s, where we saw powerful institutions of all sorts doing things that we didn't like. We saw the industrial machine pumping out cars that were unsafe at any speed, as Ralph Nader pointed out. We saw the agricultural establishment putting out groceries that had DDT in them, so women were bearing children with terrible birth defects. We saw Robert McNamara, who was sort of a quintessential vision of the establishment, sending kids off to Vietnam to be slaughtered in a quagmire. We saw bosses like Richard Daley in Chicago, segregating the city purposefully using urban renewal. In all of these cases, power was so centralized that people said, no. This Hamiltonian way of governing is corrupt, and we need to push power back down.
What would you say is the window of time when the country struck the ideal balance between these two poles? When did we get this right, and what did we do during that window? That's worth remembering.
It is
Mid-20th century.
hard not to look at the TVA and not gawk.
Say what that is.
The Tennessee Valley Authority was a bureaucracy set up in the very early years of the New Deal. The Upper South, at that point in history, was flyover country before we used that term. It was forgotten. Most of the countries had electricity. Most of the country had washers and dryers and washing machines. But the Upper South had sort of been left behind, and people were sick, and people were impoverished, and the soil had been eroded by years of logging, and people were living hand to mouth. And the private power companies that were organized into trusts under the name Commonwealth and Southern had no interest in building the poles and wires to these poor farmers because they didn't think the farmers had enough money to justify the expense. And so they lived in perpetual poverty. And when Franklin Roosevelt was elected president, he decided that he was going to use public assets to finally build power to these communities, and he was going to empower a lawyer to make the Upper South a fiefdom through the Tennessee Valley Authority. And the Tennessee Valley Authority would have just an immense amount of power to dam rivers, to reforest whole sides of mountains, to build electrical plants, to build the wires, to sell subsidized appliances to the people who live there. And in an incredibly short period of time, this entire region of the country, roughly the size of England, was powered up. It was not a perfect institution. There was, of course, enormous environmental consequences of damming rivers and building all of this stuff. Right. It was done by federal workers who were segregated, like they lived in encampments that were some were white and some were black. I mean, like there are all sorts of problematic elements to the quote unquote problematic elements to the TVA. Like it was by no means a panacea. But for the bang for the buck, the sort of notion that in a place where the private sector had failed or had no interest in serving a population that was really suffering, here was government doing enormous good at incredible speed at vast scale.
What would be like an analogous project today, like something on that scale today that we ought to do, a lot of people wish that we could do, but we simply cannot?
We have within our grasp the technology to basically replace all fossil fuel generation and erect clean energy. We have that tech, we've got batteries, we've got wires, it's all there, but you can't build the transmission lines today because from one place to the next, everyone's got an objection to that line going across this forest, through this town, near this school. It's like everyone's got an objection, and moreover, since the TVA was created in the 1930s, we've created a whole legal regime designed to protect incumbents against, insurgent new technologies and whatnot. So like there are all sorts of reasons that we can't do it. Same with high-speed rail, right? Like there are all sorts of things that we big projects akin to the TVA that you would want to do today if you had no sorts of restrictions. But to your point, at the beginning of the Biden administration, put into the bipartisan infrastructure law $7.5 billion to put electric vehicle chargers. Again, and this is very much like the TVA, the problem for the electric vehicle industry, they realized. You want to drive to grandma's house on Thanksgiving. You don't want to drive an electric vehicle because you're afraid that somewhere on that long journey you're going to get stuck without a charge and there's not going to be an EV charger. And the reason that there's no EV charger there is because there's no actual financial incentive for a company to put an EV charger there because there aren't enough EVs, right? You're sort of in a catch-22. You wouldn't build one there because there aren't enough EVs to charge there. And so not enough people purchase EVs because there isn't an EV charger there. So the Biden administration thought to themselves, we will break this cycle by subsidizing the construction of EV chargers in the places where they need to be so that people aren't afraid of what they called range anxiety. It was the right idea. So they had to throw the money through formulas to state highway departments. Well, state highway departments have never done this kind of work before, right? They know how to pave roads and to build bridges and whatnot, but they don't know how to build EV chargers. And they then have to build a system by which they can figure out where the EV chargers are allowed to go. The states then have to figure out who can bid on the projects. They have to go through a whole siting process. Once they've sited the places, they have to negotiate leases with the places that are going to host the EV chargers. Then after all of that is done, they have to figure out how to get the local utilities that control the power, how to get the power to the actual EV chargers. And no one has leverage over those utilities, certainly not the federal government or the state. So through all of this, at the end of the 3 years between which the bipartisan infrastructure law passes and Biden leaves office, $7.5 billion, 58 chargers around the country have been opened. Like, that's, for Democrats, a political disaster and a reflection not of bad management on the part of the federal government or like ill intentions or laziness or anything, but of a different system.
That is an insane situation to be in.
Yeah.
Progressives are the ones who are supposed to believe in the power of government, to do big and good things. So how did the pendulum flip in the 60s and 70s? How did the priorities shift?
So let's just go back to this book that was really the beginning of my book, which is, I'm sure for many of your listeners, sort of a formative text, which is The Power Broker by Robert Caro, which wins the Pulitzer Prize in 1975. And it's a book about Robert Moses, who was the most powerful man in New York City from the 1930s to the 1960s and built almost everything that you and I know about New York City, right? He builds Lincoln Center and the UN and lots of the highways that you've driven on when you've come in and out of the airports. Lots of housing, lots of infrastructure. And the most famous chapter of that book is called 1 Mile. And it's a chapter about his decision to build the Cross Bronx Expressway across the South Bronx. It's a project that everyone in New York City who lives in the South Bronx or represents people in the South Bronx is wildly against. The mayor of New York City is wildly against it. But Robert Moses is so powerful and wears so many hats and is so deft at understanding the politics and understanding how to maneuver things that he turns a completely deaf ear to the people who live in the East Tremont neighborhood of the South Bronx, who are asking him just to move the highway a couple of blocks to the south so that he doesn't have to displace just thousands of people in these various apartment houses. And he just doesn't care, doesn't pay attention, just does it. And the sort of notion that the Bronx becomes an urban wasteland is born really from this highway, from this decision to drive this trench through this vibrant working class portion of the city. And people see Robert Moses do this, and they see the power of this establishment figure doing what he will despite all these people pushing against him. Progressives see
No
this
Democratic checks.
and they say to themselves, we are going to put checks and balances on this centralized form of democratic government. So we are going to create environmental reviews, and we're going to create reviews based on historic preservation, and we're going to create new mandates that there be community input and community consultation, and we're going to create new rights of action so that people can sue if X and Y are happening. And we're going to make sure that there aren't disparate impacts on underrepresented minorities. And there are going to be a whole series of different kinds of protections. And the upshot is that it just becomes much more difficult for someone like Robert Moses, if they had Moses-like intentions, to do things like Robert Moses did them.
It's a totally rational, reasonable reaction to
Exactly.
government abuse and central authority coming in and bulldozing people's lives without any input at all. It was the appropriate response, right? But your point is that that sort of planted the seeds and shifted the attitude of progressivism away from government as this machine, as this organism that can do good for people, into a menace that had to be checked.
That's exactly right. The opening question of my book is, why was it in the 1950s that no one could say no to Robert Moses when he built the Cross Bronx? And then 50 years later, New York City is left with Penn Station, which is the Western Hemisphere's most traffic transit hub. More people go through Penn Station every day than live in the city of Baltimore. And yet it is, at the time of my writing, just a complete disaster. You know, it's sort of a rat pit. a rat warren of long hallways and dank and disgusting. And people have been talking for decades about making it better, and it can't happen. Too many people have the ability to say no, and by design, progressives have made it very hard to make change. And that is because we were afraid that there would be Robert Moses figures doing terrible things. So we made it very hard for anyone to do good things.
Support for the show comes from Bombas. It's the new year, so you probably have a long list of resolutions to make your life happier and more productive. Everyone has their own system. Here's mine. I take last year's resolutions and change I resolve not to. This year, I've resolved not to drink less wine, not to do more exercise, not to be a more patient, attentive, and gracious husband and father, and not to make smoother segs and ads for Bombas. If you're trying to hit the gym or get more active, the all-new Bombas sports socks are engineered with sport-specific comfort for running, golf, hiking, skiing, snowboarding, and all sport. For those everyday, around-the-house resolutions, Bombas also has you covered with the super luxurious Sherpa Sunday slippers and new squishy Saturday suede slip-ons for comfort on the go. You may know I've tried out Bombas myself. I've been rocking the sports socks for over a year now. They are my favorite. I work out in them, I run in them, I use them basically every day. You can head over to bombas.com/gray area and use code gray area for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/gray area, code gray area at checkout. Support for the gray area comes from Delete Me. If you're looking for a New Year's resolution, you might want to consider making sure your online data is protected. Delete Me can make it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. All you need to do is register and tell Delete Me what personal information you'd like removed, and their expert team takes it from there. Our colleague Claire White has used Delete Me, and here's what she thinks.
I find the reports that Delete Me has sent to be incredibly thorough. It includes the company, the removal time, and how many searches that website could have. Each report that Delete Me sends scans a list of sites they've determined to be unsafe, and they continue to report if that website is clean or if they've found your data re-pop up there after they've removed it, which is really helpful.
See why Wirecutter named Delete Me their top pick for data removal services. You can take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me, now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/Vox and use promo code VOX at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/Vox and enter code VOX at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/Vox, code VOX. Support for today's show comes from Found. Question for the small business owners out there. Do you feel like you're completely on top of your finances? Or when you heard that question, did you think, oh yeah, that's one of the dozen things I gotta do? Found is a business banking platform that can help you organize your finances so you can tackle everything else on your to-do list. Found says they can let you effortlessly track expenses, manage invoices, and prepare for taxes all in one place. Found says they've identified the tasks that create the most hassle for small businesses. Things like categorizing expenses, preparing for taxes, managing invoices, and budgeting. And they built an app that does it all directly from your business checking account. They say they can even help you uncover tax write-offs and free up valuable time. Time you can now put toward what really matters, your customers. You can take back control of your business today. Open a Found account for free at found.com. That's FOUND.com. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Lead Bank member FDIC. You can join the hundreds of thousands who've already streamlined their finances with Found. You count yourself a progressive, right?
Yes.
And the book is sort of aimed at progressives.
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of people on the left would listen and think it's a little strange to blame all the dysfunction and all the bottlenecks just on progressive reforms, right? And I wouldn't dispute what you're saying about the procedural constraints. It's all true, and it's a problem. I'm just saying a lot of what the GOP has done, certainly since the 80s, especially with Reaganism, a lot of that has been aimed at breaking the government intentionally so as to reproach it for being incompetent. And that's also a part of the story.
I think it is. I think that part of the story, though, has become so enmeshed in our progressive thinking that it's given us a pass so that we aren't ourselves self-critical about our own role. Meaning that it's very easy now when government fails to say, ugh, well, that's because of Reagan and deregulation, or saying it's just, it's the corporations, or these sort of loose blame game kind of casting aspersions, when like you can trace back the changes and the frustrations at things that we've done. Not only does it sort of absolve us of our culpability in what's happening, it also is a sort of hopeless way of thinking about the world. Too many people aren't thinking, what are the things that we can do when we're in power to make it so that government works more effectively, so that people have more faith that they can empower the government to do more. Like, if your experience with government is positive, if you're seeing that government is effectively solving problems, you're going to be much more comfortable with a party who says, I think government is going to be a better tool to solve this endemic problem in our society than the private market. We as progressives have pretty audacious goals for government, right? Like, we're looking at an education system that too often fails. We want government to solve that problem. We've got all sorts of challenges of inequality and racial injustice, like all things that we think government is the best tool to use in many cases to solve. And yet the things where government already has a full mandate, it doesn't seem to do a good job. And if our political pitch is let government cook, then like, let's make sure that it's doing its job so that we can point to successes.
What are the policies? What are the laws right now that maybe have their roots in the necessary reforms of the 60s and 70s that are jamming up progress the most, that are getting in the way of building the most? Is it environmental regulation? Is it zoning laws? What comes to mind first?
Yeah, I mean, it is all of the above. In many cases, it is the jurisprudence behind it all. It's the way that these laws are interpreted. So the law that many of my peers who are in the sort of world that I'm in, there's sort of a group of us that are all sort of writing around these issues. In this world, people bring up this law, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, which was passed in 1970. I mean, it's a very strange law. It was a law passed at the time simply to require that the engineers who were building highways kibitz about whether there were alternatives to the routes that they were choosing that had fewer environmental impacts. But the way that the law and the jurisprudence played out was that the requirement that they study or look at the alternatives allowed lawyers determined to see that the alternative route was used or the original route was not actually pursued, were able to say they did not sufficiently study to the nth degree the environmental implications of the route that they've chosen. And judges chose to say, I agree that the study was not sufficiently thorough. And so now what was supposed to be a 50-page study looking at, that's what they imagined when they passed NEPA in 1970, was that it was not going to be a particularly onerous burden. Now a NEPA study is thousands and thousands and thousands of pages because the people who are proposing to do the project, which has some sort of federal subsidy or has some federal nexus, need to anticipate what all those who object to the study will say. And the question is not whether or not the project actually has an impact. The question is whether the study has, in fact, addressed the potential for an impact. But the truth is that NEPA is just one among dozens and dozens of a very complex litany of rules and procedures that are part of this sort of game, this sort of edifice.
What they all have in common, all these kinds of laws, is they replace the top-down tyranny or the top-down authoritarianism with a kind of bottom-up obstructionism. Would you say our housing crisis is mostly a result of policy choices and legal structures? Have we engineered the housing crisis? Is that why we can't build?
Absolutely. We've got the land, and we've got the resources, we got the know-how. We know how to build houses, and we've done it before. But the people who have purchased homes, they made those homes their nest eggs. They want to live in certain sorts of communities. They don't want their investments to be imperiled by changes in the character of their communities. They have real reasons not to want a new project to be built there. And frankly, there are renters who are enjoying the lifestyle that they live at the current rent and are worried about gentrification in their neighborhood, who have similar aversion to new residents who may have the effect of raising the rent. No one wants change. Everyone wants more housing theoretically in the broader region, but nobody wants it nearby them in a way that will
just over there, just over there,
just over there, and that is all. To the point that you asked, that we have replaced the top down with sort of a bottom up tyranny. I think that there's something else going on here. The thing that Robert Moses had, probably too much of, was that he had discretion, that he could look at a problem and see all of the different, ins and outs, good and bad, and then maybe he cared about this thing and not that thing. Certainly he did. Like, he wanted to build stuff, and he didn't really care about the people who lived in the neighborhood, right? Like he did not have the values that you and I would have wanted him to have in many cases. But right. In the end, he could make the decision that he cared more about mobility than he did about green space. Those are two things that are valuable generally to society, and he could decide which one. We have within progressivism a dream, almost a fantasy, that you can set up a process, a deliberative process, a communal process, whereby everybody will speak and everyone will hear everyone else's argument. And by the end of the process, everyone will be bought into the solution. Like if you read, white papers from transportation think tanks going back the last 20, 30 years, almost always the number one recommendation is involve the community sooner. And that comes from a good place. It comes from this sort of idea that in too many cases back in the 40s and 50s, even into the 60s, people were shut out. That suddenly, you'd be sitting there eating breakfast and the backhoes would suddenly arrive in your neighborhood and nobody even knew. And suddenly, right, a highway was being born across the street. And now that can't happen. But the truth,
well, I just want to say, which is bullshit, right? That is bullshit, and it should have been stopped. The point is not that this is all a terrible idea; it's that it was necessary, but maybe the instinct has outlived its utility, and now we've got to.
The point is now that you need to have some process where people do know, and they're able to throw out their objections. They're able to put their input in, but that at the end of the day, you can't have an endless process. Someone needs to be able to have the
well, who's that someone? Someone has to decide. Who decides which trade-offs are acceptable and which aren't, right?
Government. right? Someone inside the government. Like this is the element. I don't have a simple solution to you. I can say to you that during the era of Moses' reign, there were what were called Moses men. These were the people that worked for Moses, and they worked for the government. They worked for the Triborough, Transportation Authority, or his housing authority, or whatever it was. And they worked at some discount from what they would have made in the private sector. And they were powerful men. And they stayed in those positions for long periods of time. And when they retired, they showed their grandchildren the fact that they built that playground, or they were part of the team that designed that bridge, and they were proud of it. And that if you are today a public servant who gets out of college and says, I want to work on the environment for my life, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to spend my life inside the bowels of the Environmental Protection Agency or the Army Corps of Engineers or whatever it is. Your experience is not the same, right? You go and you spend your time thinking about how am I going to make sure that we follow this rule to a T, and I don't want to anger this member of Congress, and I don't want to be on the wrong side of this, and I'm worried about us getting sued by a private actor if we make this. And you spend your time trying to follow all these rules to a T. By the end, you realize you've been there for 20 years and you actually haven't made progress on the very issue that you entered government to do. We need to make it so that these people have a requirement not to be as oblivious to public concern as Robert Moses was, but that they do have some discretion to make decisions in the public interest. That is the thing that we as progressives need to be working on, figuring out what that balance is and how that would actually effectively work.
Support for the show comes from Mint Mobile. After all the holiday travels and gift giving, you might be feeling like you have a spending hangover. Luckily for you, Mint Mobile can help you cut back on some of your overspending, on your cell phone bill at least. This January, you can get 50% off an unlimited premium wireless plan. With Mint Mobile, you can cut big wireless's bloated plans and unnecessary monthly charges with 50% off 3, 6, or 12 months of unlimited. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can even use your own phone and keep your phone number along with all your existing contacts. This January, quit overspending on wireless with 50% off unlimited premium wireless. That means plans start at $15 a month at mintmobile.com/gray area. That's mintmobile.com/gray area. Limited time offer. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12 months. Plan required for $15 a month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. More than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com. Support for the show comes from Quince. New year, new you? Well, that's a pretty tall order. Give yourself a chance to succeed with an actually attainable goal. Like new year, new nickname. Maybe you've already got a sweet nickname, like Snake or Dunder. In that case, why not sign up for New Year, New Wardrobe? That should feel pretty transformative. And for that, you can check out Quince. Quince makes quality wardrobe staples that are stylish and affordable. From soft Mongolian cashmere sweaters that feel like designer pieces without the markup, to 100% silk tops and skirts for easy dressing up, to perfectly cut denim for everyday wear. Claire White has gotten some Quince herself.
My last Quince order, I got the Italian leather bold buckle slingback flats. They're so chic and comfortable. The leather is super great quality. I feel like they're gonna last in my closet for a really long time.
Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Don't wait. Go to quince.com/gray area for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/gray area to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/gray area. Obama's Recovery Act triggered over 192,000 NEPA reviews. I mean, I get that not every project can be shovel ready, but my God, I mean, that's crazy. California's been trying to build a high-speed rail between Frisco and LA for years now and has basically nothing to show for it because every study leads to another lawsuit and every lawsuit leads to another review, and no one has the authority to just say, we're fucking doing this.
Yeah. The dream we have is that if you do enough studies, you'll get everyone's buy-in. But, like, that's not the case.
So what's the model, Mark?
We need to be able to make hard choices between hard things, between beautiful green land and housing, between, if you're going to do LA to San Francisco, you're going to have to go through high-value neighborhoods with straight track lines, right? Like progressives are going to have to empower bureaucrats, probably in the executive branch, to make hard decisions that voters aren't going to like who are going to be affected by them. And so broadly speaking, you ask what the solution is. It is creating systems where everyone has a voice, unlike the Robert Moses days where almost no one had a voice, but no one has a veto, which almost everyone has today. Where we have a system whereby nobody's concern goes unheard, but by the same token, if you don't like the decision, you don't automatically have some avenue to be able to upend the process and hold it in abeyance. And so how that works within the sort of provisions of current law, I think we're still working on that. I think that that is sort of the next challenge for thinkers within progressive policymaking is how do we create systems where people feel even when their neighborhood is affected by a big government decision for the good of the whole region, that they haven't been completely left behind.
Do you see a solution to the problem of just the collapse of trust in government and public institutions? I mean, that's sort of the whole game here, right? I mean, you have to have a certain level of trust as a precondition for doing anything significant collectively. And, we should say in the early 60s, 4 out of 5 Americans trusted Washington to, quote, do what's right. This is in your book. And in 2022, that figure is now 1 out of 5. Yeah. That's bad, dude. Real bad. And I guess the question is, even if we do get a high-functioning government that delivers, will that translate to a shift in how people perceive it?
So this is actually the most miraculous part of American democracy to me, is that, if you woke up in the early 20th century with how incompetent government was at that point, like there's some crazy stories of the incompetence of American government at the turn of the 20th century. If you ever worked in Congress, when you introduce a bill, you can introduce a public bill or a private bill, and most people don't even know what a private bill is. But private bills were there because at that time, members of Congress were introducing private bills to include people into the pension system for the Civil War. So like it's 1905, right? The Civil War has been over for 40 years, and they are adding people to the pension rolls in private bills. I mean, just completely corrupt, right? Like who would trust government that was just like nakedly corrupt like that?
Right.
And like you couldn't imagine ever at that moment that you're going to trust government with big, powerful institutions that are going to do the kinds of things that David Lilienthal or Robert Moses are going to do 50 years hence. And yet we get from that period to the Robert Moses period. You just couldn't imagine a Robert Moses in 1905. And yet there he is in 1955 doing the 1 mile in the South Bronx. In the moment that Robert Moses is doing that in 1955, when he's so powerful that even the mayor of New York can't stand up against him to stop him from doing this horrible thing in the South Bronx. And, Richard Daley is doing something similar in Chicago, and there are bosses all over the country. These establishment figures are doing things, and like it just feels as though there's an establishment that is absolutely in control of the country, and that the kids marching in the streets are completely powerless to stop them from sending them off to Vietnam and polluting the country and doing whatever they want. That there's an elite establishment that is absolutely impervious to any influence. Like you couldn't have imagined the situation that we're in today, where like I don't know, like the establishment just seems, like they can't, nothing can get done. Like they can't build a bridge, right? Like we go from these extremes in American history that where you're in a period where, as you say, like right now, trust is so low. How are you ever going to reestablish it? Like things will change, and like it's almost impossible to imagine. I have faith that if government begins doing small things well, that people will begin to see the value in having public institutions that are effective. And if they see public institutions that are effective, they will say, listen, I think this is better than what the private sector is producing. Will it happen? I don't know. But it does seem to me that like the sort of sense that we're wallowing right now in dysfunction and that will last forever is proven by history not to be right. And like I'm actually fairly bullish that like the spirit of American entrepreneurialism and innovation and wanting to make things better and seeing problems and wanting to solve them, that like that will reemerge.
I'll leave it right there. This is a lot of fun. I'm not a policy wonk by any stretch of the imagination, but I really enjoyed reading it. I learned a lot, and it does a really good job of moving from sort of theory to abstract and not just making kind of big picture arguments, but also getting like very specific about what can be done, what should be done to fix this mess. And I feel smarter after having read it. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me on. This is a big treat for me.
Awesome. Once again, the book is called Why Nothing Works. Marc Dunkelman. Thank you, sir.
Take care.